Hello and welcome as we come now to the Fifth Sunday of Lent. Once again, this is one of the Sundays, those of you who perhaps recognize that we are preparing young people or people generally to be received into the church at the Easter Vigil, is the third week for the giving of scrutinies, just as a little a reminder of that. The readings assigned for this time are from the prophet Ezekiel, chapter 37, verses 12 through 14, from the letter of Paul to the Romans, chapter 8, verses 8 through 11, and from the gospel tradition according to John, chapter 11, verses 1 through 45. So this is, again, one of the longer episodes. Once again, we are taking this reading from the tradition according to John. You'll notice that we have done this for the last 2 weeks. This is the third week now. And these weeks are very special because what connects them pretty much together is the idea of water, of light, and now life. The Lord says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so the story that we hear today is the story which involves Lazarus and the raising of Lazarus. Now, as I mentioned, it's a relatively long episode. As we know in the Gospel of John, which pictures Jesus there are two major divisions, those of you who are familiar with the structure of the Johannine Gospel. But the first half of the Gospel is called the Book of Signs. And there are 7 signs, we would call them miracles. Of those 7 signs, 6 of them are original to the fourth Gospel. The one sign, that is the multiplication or the distribution of a great amount of loaves and fishes, is common to also the synoptics. The gospel here, again, this is in developing these signs that Jesus performs, kind of grades them. They get better or more wonderful as each one goes on. The first had begun by Jesus changing water into wine, earthly, material kinds of things. We come now, and the gospel story that we hear this time is the last of the great signs. Jesus brings life again to a man named Lazarus. So this then is the greatest of signs, and in many ways will end what is known as the Book of Signs, and then we'll go to the Book of Glory, which describes Jesus' death and resurrection. All right? Now, how does this begin? And it pictures, keep in mind, that Jesus has run into conflict throughout the Johannine Gospel with the authorities. The authorities in John's Gospel are either referred to as the Pharisees or as the Jews. We have mentioned at a number of discussions to be careful about the use of the word the Jews. That does not refer to, as sometimes in later Christian history, unfortunately as it was, as the whole of the Jewish tradition. Namely, when we speak even maybe today in English, we have to be a little cautious there. The Jews. So here, when the Johannine writer talks about the Jews, he is merely speaking about certain members of Judaism, even those Jews, by the way, who lived in the south, in Judea, and who were in authority, who were the rulers of the time. Namely, and this would be an elect group who operated basically out of Jerusalem. So again, because the term the Jews has been really the source of much antagonism, unfortunately, on the part of the Christian tradition throughout the centuries. Here, as I say, maybe translators, of course, argue you shouldn't change the text. The text says the Jews, so we say the Jews, but maybe better to say the Jewish leaders or to say the Judeans. At least that would relegate a smaller number of members of the Hebraic family. I review all of that because, again, quite uncritically, when the Passion narrative of John is proclaimed on Good Friday, the term Jews is simply used, and I'm not sure what people pick up when they hear that term or how they understand what group or who are being referred to in that tradition. All right, so again, just to kind of review all of that, but in the Johannine Gospel up to this point, now this is chapter 11, attempts have been made on Jesus' life by those who do not like what he is doing or saying. In fact, he has escaped being stoned in earlier chapters and has left Jerusalem. So we believe, and the Johannine text points this out, that Jesus has withdrawn to the east across the Jordan River to a region which provides for him, and of course it's important to keep in mind that the gospel narrative, although not historical, is leading up to the death and resurrection of Jesus, finds safety across the Jordan, that is, in a territory that technically doesn't belong to the Judeans or to the Jewish community. So therefore, that's where Jesus is as the gospel narrative begins. It is there that word comes to him that his friend Lazarus is ill. And the message has come, we believe, of course, from his sisters, namely Martha and Mary. So these are the three, and important to keep in mind that as John recognizes, these are the three friends of Jesus. So word comes that Lazarus is ill. Now, the Martha and Mary here, the Mary here, by the way, is the one who had anointed Jesus' feet and wiped them with her hair. Now, the text mentions that, but it's interesting, that has not yet happened. It only happens in the next upcoming chapter when they are at a dinner that Lazarus holds in their house at Bethany. So this is known as an anticipatory statement. So you hear that and, oh, okay. But just to kind of notice, as I mentioned very often with regard to the Johannine writer, he often has various layers of meanings about terms and events. So the word sent from the sisters, Lord, he whom you love is ill. By the way, they do not mention his name. So Jesus does not mention name, but the one whom Jesus loves. That's an interesting phrase. And in different ways, it will be interpreted by those who look at the text as referring to whom. Well, if this is the one whom Jesus loved, then the reference seems to be to Lazarus, doesn't it? Doesn't that seem to be the case? So, word now where Jesus is comes about Lazarus' condition. What are the sisters asking? Well, one assumes that by sending word to where Jesus is, that he will come and help their brother. Now, Keep in mind that what that means is that Jesus has to move from the relative security where he is back into the territory where those who were seeking his life are available. So it may not be as simple as it seems when the request is made. And are they requesting that he does something? One can only assume that they will. However, Jesus stays, and John mentions this, 2 days more. He does nothing. They do not move. Then Jesus says, well, this illness of, and the implication is Lazarus, and we'll use his name Lazarus, although Jesus doesn't, has led to the fact that Lazarus is asleep. Now, here again, we have different meanings of the word sleep. Obviously, it can simply mean what we mean, to be sleeping. But it also has the meaning of death. And as Jesus says this to the disciples, well, let's go, our brother, friend is asleep. They say, and the disciples say, well, look, if he's sleeping, he's all right. There's no need for you to go, because they are well aware that once they cross the Jordan again, they are putting not only Jesus, but perhaps even themselves in a dangerous position. Jesus clarifies this by saying, no, the sleep you are referring to is not the case. He's dead. All right? So the recognition now is that once Jesus makes this move, he is endangering his own life. And of course, that fits the pattern of Johannine Gospel, that what Jesus will do is willingly accept the death, okay? He points out that Lazarus' illness is ordered in order to give life-giving glory to God. Jesus always makes reference to what he is doing as being what God would want. Now, as the disciples kind of try to make the case, don't do this, Jesus says, let's go, because the light still shines. He says, the day is still here. Now keep in mind that day, of course, in the Jewish community is from sunrise to sunset, and they divide the day nicely into 12 hours. We've talked about that. There's always a lot of this kind of symbolism at work, particularly in the fourth gospel. And so Jesus is pictured as saying, the day is now, we must work the works of him who sent me. Night comes when no one can do any more work. Night here would make a reference, John does, to Jesus' death. But as long as it is day, he is the light of the world. Remember, we've seen that last time in our discussion with the man who was born blind. Jesus' idea of the light, he is the light. He is now able to continue to do the work of the Lord. So, as Jesus had said, I'm going to wake up Lazarus, okay? And again, you get the double meaning, sleep or death. And when, of course, the idea, common reference here is that if you sleep, when you wake up, you are hopefully refreshed and renewed, all right? Well, the disciples, of course, as I say, and this, again, is a typical device used by the fourth gospel, misunderstand what Jesus is saying. But very often that is always included in discussions that Jesus has with people. Going back to the Nicodemus story, unless a man be born again of water and the Spirit, one cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, says Nicodemus, how can a man be born again? You can't go back into... See, it's a misunderstanding. And of course, this is, again, a technique that very effectively the fourth gospel, as I mentioned, writer uses in order to present his message about Jesus. So they come now. Where do they come from? Wherever they are across the Jordan, and come to Bethany. Now, Bethany, we have noted before, is just outside the city of Jerusalem, about 2 miles, therefore not too far from the center of the threats to Jesus' life. It is the leaders in Jerusalem who are concerned about Jesus, and perhaps they've even, although we need to be careful here, have engineered the idea of stoning Jesus as a blasphemer. Well, that will not happen here, okay? So they come. As they are approaching Bethany, Martha and Mary, of course, are bemoaning the fact that their brother has died. Martha comes out to meet Jesus. Now, this is an interesting encounter. When she meets him, we're not quite sure just where, as Jesus is approaching Bethany, this occurs. Her opening remarks, or words to Jesus are, Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So the implication is, and again, keep in mind that Jesus had healed the man who had been born blind, had healed others. If indeed he had healed them, could he not, if indeed this is the one whom Jesus loved, been here to heal him? Well, that all lies perhaps behind Martha's word to Jesus. Well, Jesus says to Martha, don't worry, your brother will rise again. Now, this is kind of ambiguous, exactly. We maybe interpret this right away, but exactly what does that mean, will rise again? When? How? Martha says, yes, I know he will rise again on the last day. Interestingly here, Martha now is pictured as a woman of faith. She believes that God certainly can do things and will work through maybe even the activities of Jesus himself. Jesus now says to her, look, well, I don't say he says look, but says to her, I am, and these are important words now found in verse 25 of the collection of stories here. I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if they die, they will live. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. So Jesus is giving here to Martha really a wonderful statement, is he not? It is in these words of Jesus, the fourth gospel writer is developing what is known as a realized eschatology. Eschatology is the coming of God's ways. Much of the gospel in other places and in the synoptics as well speak of what we call a future eschatology, a coming of the Lord in glory. And even somewhat in our liturgy today, we still kind of think a bit like that. Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. So that is what we call a future eschatology, a coming of the Lord in glory. But John here now pictures Jesus as establishing that the eschatology, the coming of the Lord, is when Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. See, so it's what we call a realized eschatology. Just so for those of you who like the word eschatology and perhaps wonder how it works in to the discovery of the material found in all four of the Gospels and even in some parts of the New Testament. But here, John sees Jesus, when he says this, as coming already in glory. Notice that whoever believes in me, even if they die, will live. Now, Jesus then says to Martha, do you believe this? See, so having made this wonderful statement and claim, now asks Martha whether or not she accepts what he has said. Now, Martha responds by saying, I have come to believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world. So interestingly, in John's Gospel, it is Martha who makes the proclamation that Jesus is the Son of God, that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah. Notice that in the other Gospels, that claim that you are the Christ falls often on the lips of Peter. But here, that belief is first expressed by Martha. So there's a little different understanding and tradition that has developed by the time that the Johannine Gospel has been written. The discussion may go a little bit more clearly. What exactly does that mean, that Jesus is the resurrection and the life? But there is no further clarification in John's Gospel. The discussion kind of ends there as Jesus is pictured as moving on. So important, though, to see that Martha in this Gospel is in many ways a wonderful example of faith and belief in Jesus and in who he is, and unlike the other Gospels where emphasis does not fall on Jesus describing something about himself, here he does. The I am, of course, is one of a number of what we call I am statements that are found in the Gospel of John. We have seen a couple of them. Perhaps later on in the Easter time, we will see I am the Good Shepherd. I am indicates the reality of Jesus being truly the Son of God. Now, as they move on, Martha is with Jesus, we assume. Mary now hears that Jesus is coming and goes out to meet him, and with him a large number of Jews also follow her. Now, who are these Jews? Well, and again, it goes back to some points we were making a little bit earlier at the beginning of our discussion, assuming that they would in some ways be friends of Martha and Mary, and they follow Mary as she goes out to Jesus. So they will be witnesses to what is going to happen. Mary's words to Jesus are the same as the opening words of Martha had been. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. All of that kind of quickly evolves. We don't get any discussion that Mary and Jesus has. Mary falls at the feet of Jesus. That perhaps indicates again that her belief in him, but is it the same as Martha's, or is it a different kind, or is it a kind of friendship? So all of that is kind of preparatory as Jesus now moves to the place where Lazarus has been buried. The gospel writer now pictures Jesus having some emotional reactions. It's interesting, we don't find this too often in the other Gospels. In fact, he mentions 4 reactions of Jesus. He is greatly disturbed in spirit. He is troubled himself. He wept, and he is greatly disturbed within himself. So all of those phrases are used very quickly here. As many have pointed out, Jesus wept is the shortest verse of all in the gospel tradition. Certainly shows Jesus' physical side as a human being. Indeed, if this is friend, the one whom he loved, one can understand what does it mean that he is greatly disturbed within himself? Some point out that this may be anger at the fact that Jesus' friend have died. Interpreters, again, do this in their own way. Jesus certainly here recognizes that what he is doing is placing his own life in greater danger. His love for his friend, however, does not keep him from fearing for his own life. So a point that kind of making as we go along here, there's a double layer here that is, life is going to be given to Lazarus. Jesus' own death is now being foretold and doomed. All right, they come now to the tomb. Jesus will give life to the one he loves by taking steps that he clearly foresees will bring the loss of his own life. As they're at the tomb, it's a cave sealed with a large stone. Jesus says, remove the stone. Martha, ever pictured as very practical, says, Jesus, it's 4 days since Lazarus has died. You really don't want to open the tomb. Not only will there be a kind of smoke or odor, but also keep in mind that in 4 days, the body of Lazarus will begin to have disintegrated. You really won't recognize him. We forget that they didn't embalm in those days. Anyway, Jesus says a little prayer to God, saying, I do this because for your sake, for the glory of God. Listen to this. And then Jesus calls out in a loud voice, saying, Lazarus, come out. And Lazarus is pictured coming out. You can see that would be kind of dramatic, wrapped up in the burial cloths of the time. And Jesus says to Lazarus here, who is totally impassive, okay? After all, his hands and feet are tied, his head is tied, he can't, how he walks out, I'm not sure, but anyway, there he is. And Jesus says, unwrap him. There is, again, a double layer here, by the way, as they take off the head cloth that covers his face and then unwrapped him with the rest of the cloth. Later on Easter Sunday, or the day of resurrection, when they enter the tomb of Jesus, they will find the cloth and the head cloth that covered his face neatly rolled up and sitting on the slab where Jesus had been placed. So again, get this anticipatory. Lazarus can't do anything by himself. Someone else has to do it for him. Jesus, however, obviously has done this for himself. The bystanders who notice what has happened, again, there are two reactions. Some positively say, gee, Jesus really is perhaps the Messiah, the Son of God, and they believe in Jesus and what they have seen. Others see this negatively, and they go off and tell the Pharisees what had happened, what Jesus had done. Now, perhaps some did it because they didn't like Jesus, or perhaps some were just kind of naive, did not really realize how dangerous their conclusion was. Suffice it to say, the episode ends here We assume what will follow, although that is not included in our reading, is that the family, that is Lazarus, Mary, and Martha, will have a dinner for Jesus and invite some of those who had been witnesses there. And in the verses that immediately follow the ones we hear today, the Jews are really upset, and it's at this point that Caiaphas, who was the high priest of the year, says, "It is better for one man to die for the people than for the whole nation to perish." Here, of course, is the key word for key understanding in this gospel. Well, I think we've kind of run out of time. Thank you for being with us. I hope to see you again.